Celebration of Mission and Ministry Sunday. It's not our regular gathered, it is our regular gathered worship, but it's not our regular order for worship. What we do in this celebration of mission and ministry is celebrate God's presence in the life of this congregation in the last year. We celebrate the way God has been working among us and transforming us and making a difference in our lives and in the world. So throughout this service, we'll be hearing from different people as our work is gathered in the movements of worship, and we'll also be responding to that activity of God in a number of different ways as well. Our gathering time is the beginning of our ministries. We have a number of ministries in the life of our church that are called gathering ministries. That come under the gathering ministries. They include our educational ministries, our worship ministries, our variety of music ministries, all the things that happen in the music ministry, hospitality and greeting and prayer and multimedia and sound are all part of those ministries. What is the song we sing? What is the word we proclaim? As we've been coming towards celebrating our 100th anniversary, we've been exploring that very question. And Dave Hogenauer has been wading through our history. And I invited him to come and reflect with you on how wading through our history and writing our history has had an impact on him and his life.
Here is the 75th anniversary history. Is that what it should be like? Well, this is 6 pages long. The 20 years of Gus Warfield's ministry here have about 10 paragraphs and end with this conclusion. Mr. Warfield led us through the difficult times of civil unrest, inflation, and war in Vietnam. That gives no idea of the agony some of us went through during those years. For instance, at one point, the pastor's best friend left the congregation, convinced that the draft counseling we were offering to boys in the congregation was aimed at trying to get our kids to be draft dodgers. That kind of feeling of that age should not be overlooked from either side. At the time of our 75th, George Betts had been our pastor for 10 years. After a mere one paragraph about those 10 years, the history has this to say. It is not within the scope of this historical survey to summarize the work of our present pastor. Let that evaluation be undertaken by the writers of our 100th anniversary brochure. So here we are, ready to go. And the Centennial Committee took up the challenge and decided to ask for a longer, more in-depth history. And I have been researching and writing since last fall. Now, how have my ideas been influenced by this ministry I've been involved in? Just one way is this. My understanding of the positive role an interim period between pastors can serve has been heightened. Gus Warfield arrived here at Prospect a mere month after the sudden, unexpected death of the former pastor after 35 years being here. A pastor so beloved that 5 years later when I arrived, some people still looked up to him as almost a god. How could the congregation survive that? And how must that have influenced how they were able to react to a new pastor with different style and hardly a charismatic preacher? Even though he was a caring pastor, intelligent and larger than life in his own way. How could a congregation that hadn't even had a chance to grieve or say goodbye or have a good farewell dinner for their previous pastor adjust that quickly? The interim between Gus Warfield and the next pastor, George Betts, was 18 months, but the interim pastor stayed only for half a year. The Pastoral Search Committee set its sights on finding a pastor almost the opposite of what they had just experienced for 20 years. And in many ways, we as a congregation swung to the opposite extreme and again found a very charismatic preacher like the one that had been here for 35 years. When George Betts left, and before Rick came to us, there was a really long interim. 3 years and 1 month. With an interim pastor who was with us almost the entire time. This pastor, Bill Love, believed Prospect had had too many years of powerful personalities for pastors and purposely downplayed his own role so that the congregation might define itself on its own. The 3-year period gave the congregation time to grieve, to heal somewhat, and instead of swerving to the opposite extreme, seeking someone who is a complete contrast to the previous pastor, we took note of the best in all our former pastors and sought someone who exhibited those traits. Rick has been with us for 16 years, and this history does not defer to the writers of the 125th anniversary history, a summation of what he has been doing. Not just his years, but the years of a team of Rita, Rick, and Jason. Without the interim pastor telling us that we had to do it, we moved away from seeking the somewhat overpowering personalities of the past. As much as I and most of the congregation, it seemed to me, found the interim period of tough love from Bill Love difficult to endure, I have now come to the conclusion that that interim was probably the best thing that could have happened for us. I now see the wisdom of the Presbyterian requirement for an interim. To allow time for a congregation to heal and to define itself and to protect the pastor from invidious comparison to the previous pastor. The history is written, it's finished, but it's not published yet. It will be almost 100 pages with photos and appendices. You'll be hearing more about it in the months to come. Obviously, it can't be given away free, as in the past, when it's of that scope. But here, you will find the anecdotes and stories that bring to life the congregation that we were and that we have become. Not just a history, but a lively story of a congregation going places and serving God, with all the joys and agonies, ups and downs that we as human beings, due to our nature, go through.
Life and it's ministry together. And in worship, we have, if you were to draw a diagram of what happens in worship, you have gathering as a small circle and sending as a small circle that take us into, that bring us out of the world and send us back into the world. And then two long lines, and one of those is proclaiming God's word. The other long line is thanksgiving. When we take all the gifts that God has given us and offer them up to God and in service to God. There are a lot of ministries in our church that are thanksgiving ministries. Things like property and finance and our coaching teams and the distribution of our mission offerings. Those are all thanksgivings as we take the gifts that God has given us and share them with others and make use of them for the work to which God has called us. This year we decided to do something a little different in the Thanksgiving ministry. We have had a treasurer for quite some time, and I asked the treasurer if he would reflect on what difference being treasurer makes in his life and how that's transformed his faith journey.
Good morning. I was asked to speak on my role as treasurer and how it has impacted my life and strengthened my faith. At first I thought it would be difficult to make that connection. When one thinks of a treasurer, you think of a bean counter, a money cruncher, one who's focused on the dreaded B word, budget. How do those attributes relate to growth and faith? However, it's not so much that the responsibilities of the treasurer that has helped me in my faith journey, but how that position has afforded me access to treasures within our faith community that I would not have taken full advantage if it were not for my role as treasurer. By way of history, I am one of those rarities that Rick and Carolyn Berry refer to as a lifelong Presbyterian. I was raised in the Bronx Eastchester Presbyterian Church. And my family was content to gather on Sunday mornings for service, and then we would go to, the kids would attend Sunday school, and after those 2 hours, we would rush home to catch the Abbott and Costello movie on PIX. And that was our tradition. I never knew that there was more to the church and never expected much beyond that. When Jocasta and I moved out here, we were looking for a church to help us connect and grow as a family. And to be honest, my expectation actually was to reestablish that routine, but instead of Abbott Costello, I would substitute football. Luckily, we found Prospect. Before we joined, we met with Rick at our home, and he discussed life at Prospect, and he gathered some information about us and what we expected when we planned on joining the church. I guess from that conversation, as we became members, Rick and Pete Abdel approached me about actually becoming treasurer of this church. Now, I was not knowing what the position entailed. I was kind of reluctant to say yes. But thanks to my wife's encouragement, I actually agreed, and Pete actually confirmed that he would actually be around if I had any questions or any concerns. He will always be there to answer, and true to his word, he did. And he's very detail-oriented, so he left notes for me that even if he wasn't there, I still knew what to do. Now, my role as treasurer, I have been exposed to all the resources provided by the church, to our faith community, and to the community outside our gathering. We hear the announcements towards the ends of service of the opportunities available to the church. Were it not for my role as treasurer, I would not truly understand the effort, the commitment, and dedication of the people towards those opportunities and the benefits that we all could receive by participating in those opportunities. Whether it be the variety of programs that the mission funding supports, the service and support of our deacons that they provide, the connection and hope within the IHN program, the MEND ministry, the exploration and reflection afforded us when we participate in the retreat, and many, many more services throughout the church. The sad reality is that my church in the Bronx probably provided the same services, but I was too narrow-minded to actually be aware of that. Strangely, it's this role as treasurer that I've been pleasantly exposed to the wonderful opportunities afforded us as a faith community. I continue to marvel as the many treasures my life at Prospect has afforded me and my family, and I look forward to learning, connecting, and growing with you in my journey. Thank you.
We now turn to our sending ministries. As we send ourselves out into society and into all the world to be the body of Christ in the world, we go from the table and from the gathered community to bring God's presence and God's bread and God's love and compassion to all the world. These ministries include things like the senior high mission trip, or meeting emergency needs with dignity, just the gathering of food, or the Interfaith Hospitality Network, or the Seasons Camp, or our newest, which is the feeding program, run under Meeting Emergency Needs with Dignity. We invited one participant to reflect on how that has made a difference in her life, and Margaret Matachwa is going to share with us. There you go.
Most, if not all of us, are involved in the feeding program. We come together every third Sunday of the month and make sandwiches in Fellowship Hall to be delivered in Penn Station. I'm not really sure how I got involved with feeding program, but I think it's through MEND. I got involved in MEND about 4 or 5 years ago when Stacy and her 2 friends from a Girl Scout troop, as part of their Silverwood, collected over 100 bags of food, and we were trying to figure out what pantries in Essex County we could donate that food to. How has the feeding program changed me or helped me in my faith journey? The feeding program has changed the way I look at different situations in my life. We've all heard about how homelessness and hunger and how many people have been struggling, trying to feed their families over the last many years due to the bad economy. But until I got involved in the feeding program, it was more just like hearing and not being involved or not seeing the people. When I started going to Newark, it gave me a different perspective. I am less judgmental about people who are struggling. I've learned that homeless men and women are real people that may have led a productive life before they fell in the different situations that has led them to hang out in Penn Station, Newark. And these people have names and have skills as well. If you've been to Newark, there's one member named Kenny who knows everyone, who knows who's not coming for a sandwich, who also knows not to just give seconds at the end of our trip there, because at the end of the day, on a Sunday evening when we're all back in Maplewood, South Orange, or our local communities, the people who don't have anything to eat. And he's able to take those extra bags and distribute them later to people who really have nothing to eat at the end of the day. Walking around Penn Station announcing that we have sandwiches has had an impact on me. It's humbled me in a way. Sometimes it's hard to face people, who are sleeping and try and wake them up or just to be a little louder when you're near them, because I don't know what to do, if I should shake them and wake them up to come for a sandwich. But it's helped me realize how blessed I am and how blessed we all are, especially in our church community. It helps me change my perspective, regardless of what circumstance in my life, big or small, real or blown out of proportion, that there are people out there that are really struggling, and there are people out there that really need us. If you look at at the congregation when they're making sandwiches in fellowship hall, they move really fast and it looks effortless. And it just gives a different picture that we are capable of a lot more. And there's a whole lot more people that are suffering and can use our help. Donating time is almost as valuable, if not more valuable, than donating the food and the money. Thank you.